Hi everyone! Thanks for being here. Today I'm going to walk you through how I modeled this little witch character, who's actually the future central figure of my channel. It's been quite a journey and I really wanted to share all the behind the scenes details, not just the polished result, but the process itself, including the struggles and decisions I made along the way. So I started with a small vector sketch. It wasn't anything super detailed, just something clean and simple that I could use as a reference throughout the modeling process. Starting with a concept, even a quick one, really helps keep the vision clear and consistent, especially when working on stylized characters like this. For the body, I went with subdivided cubes. A really basic approach. I actually hesitated at first, thinking about whether I should go with a wig-friendly base mesh, maybe using only vertices and a skin modifier, kind of like a beard and mannequin first. But in the end, this method just made more sense for what I wanted to achieve. Hands, that part is always a bit of a personal nemesis, honestly. Even back when I was doing 2D art, hands were always the most dreaded things to draw. And in 3D, I've found that challenge doesn't completely go away. It's different but still tricky. You want them to look like actual hands with the right proportion, but you also want to avoid overcomplicating them, especially when the rest of the character is fairly simplified and stylized. So I followed this technique I had seen in a tutorial. It's really beginner friendly and it gives solid results. I created the hands as part of the same mesh as the arms and then connected them to the torso afterward, adjusting things gradually. It's not the cleanest workflow in the world, but for me it worked. And I think it's important to go with the method that makes the most sense for you, even if it's not the most by-the-book approach. You'll probably notice throughout the video that my process is a little chaotic. I don't go from A to B in a straight line. There's a lot of trial and error. I try something, then I undo it, then I try something else. And I think that's totally okay. That's how you learn, especially when working on something outside of your comfort zone. And speaking of that, this project definitely pushed me outside of mine. I'm much more used to modeling static objects, things like props, furniture, or small environments. So moving into character design, especially something organic and expressive, was a big shift for me. After the arms and hands were done, I moved on to the legs and feet. And wow, the feet were harder than I expected. I did several versions before I landed on one that actually felt like it belonged with the rest of the character. Then came the ears. Nothing too fancy. I kept them very simple on purpose. I didn't want them to overcomplicate the mesh or get in the way of rigging and animation later. So once the body was mostly complete, I started working on the hair. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to give her 2 big braids, something iconic and playful. I used a curve-based method where I started with a simple path and applied a rag modifier to it. Then I added a skin modifier followed by a subdivision surface modifier to smooth everything out. It's a method I love because it's easy to control and effective for stylized hairstyles like this. That braids technique feels a bit like magic, honestly. You just set it up and suddenly it's a braids. No need to cut each strand manually. It's a huge time saver, and the visual result fits perfectly with the style I was aiming for. At this stage, the body you're seeing is almost final, but I did go back and tweak a few things later. Unfortunately, I forgot to record those changes, so they're not in the video, but just know there were some subtle adjustments made post here. So now onto the rest of the hair. I used another curve technique where one curve controls the shape of another. Basically, you use a circle to define the thickness of your hair strand, and then you deform it with a longer curve to get a flowy strand. It was the first time I tried this, and I followed a tutorial to guide me through the process. And I have to say, even if it took a while, the result was worth it. I ended up making a collection of strands, kind of like a library, and then manually placed them around the head. This gave me a lot of flexibility in terms of shape and direction. I wanted to go for a clean, cartoonish look, something readable but still dynamic. Now, here's the thing about the hair in 3D. It takes time, like a lot of time. You can go super simple and get it done quickly, but the results often lack character. I really think it's worth investing the extra time to get something that feels unique and polished. Even though it was exhausting at times, I don't regret it. Placing the hair strands one by one was probably the most tedious part of this entire project. I had to keep in mind the character designs. Those big braids on each side meant the rest of the hair needed to look like it was gathered and tied appropriately. That means being super careful with the positioning of each piece. It was slow and repetitive. And by the end, I will be honest, I was kind of over it. But I'm glad I pushed through. If there is one thing this project taught me, it's that patience and perseverance are key. There are so many moments where I felt stuck or unsure, but pushing through those helped me learn a ton, not just technically, but creatively as well. So at this point, I was finally done placing all the hair strands on one side of the head, and rather than doing everything twice, I decided to be smart about it, work efficiently, and just use a mirror modifier to reflect the hairstyle on the other side. It saves me a ton of time and kept everything symmetrical, which just made sense for the character. After mirroring well, I had to go in and adjust the wood positionings of the hair strands. They didn't line up perfectly, so I took a moment to refine them and make the hairline look nicer and more natural. That detail might seem small, but it really helps sell the overall look. And I added a few strands in the front, especially one larger strand right in the middle of the forehead, kind of like a defining feature. I really liked how that shaped the face and gave the character more personality. Next, I added the braids. At first, they were completely straight, but later I came back and gave them a bit of a curve to make them feel more natural. Unfortunately, I didn't record that part. To be honest, I had already stopped recording for the day. I thought I was done. But then I reopened the file to just tweak a few things, and you know how it goes. That's when I reshaped the braids slightly and also adjust the body, especially around the hips. To finish off the braids, I added a little strands of hair at the end and a scratchy to cover the tip. Because let's be honest, the raw end of the braids didn't look very appealing. Adjusting that hair tie helped hide it nicely and made the whole hairstyle feel more polished. I applied the mirror modifier once again, and there we go. The base character was done. After that, I decided to test out acrylic for the first time. I had never used it before. I usually rig everything in Mixamo, but I was curious to try it out. So the character model was already complete, so I imported it and started placing the bones. What really surprised me was how accurate it was, especially for the fingers, which are often the hardest part to get it right. I've always had trouble with hand rigging, but acrylic did a surprisingly good job, and I was genuinely impressed and a little relieved. I played along with the calibration tools too. There are a bunch of built-in animations you can preview to test how the rig behaves, and honestly, it was pretty fun just watching the character move around. I may have gotten a bit distracted testing poses. Sorry. At that point, if you look closely, you'll notice I had already tweaked the body mesh, especially around the hips and upper legs. That's where I felt the proportions were off, so I reshaped them a little to give the character more balancement. Once I was done testing, I exported the animation from iCarring and brought it back into Blender. Now, I didn't record this part either. I was still getting used to the pipeline and just forgot to hit record. But basically, I used an add-on to correct the accurate armature into a Rigify compatible rig, which gave me more flexibility for future animations. Then I finally jumped into what turned out to be the most time-consuming part of the entire project: simulating hair physics. You will see here that I gave the character and temporary face, just something quick to visualize, although it doesn't stay that way for long. For the physics simulation, my first idea was to create a big cube, sort of like a lattice that surrounded all of the hair. I applied a soft body modifier to the cube and then used a surface deform modifier on the hair so that it would follow the movement of the cube. Well, spoiler alert, that did not work. The idea sounded good in theory, but the cube was way too large and generic. It didn't match the shape of the braids closely enough, so the hair just ended up behaving very strangely. I kind of suspected that might happen, so I gave it another try with a smaller cube that hugged the braids more closely, but yeah, still no luck. At that point, I kind of rage quit and stepped away from the computer for the day. I came back the next day with a clearer head and a new plan. This time I created a custom shape, something that more closely resembled the actual hairstyle shape. I used a shrink wrap modifier to wrap it tightly around the hair, giving me a more accurate collision mesh. And I used a surface deform modifier again to bind the braids to this new mesh, but worked way better. I also painted a weight map to control how much influence the soft body would have on different parts of the mesh. This gave me more control over how the hair would move and settle. Before that, I had tested using cloth physics instead of soft body, thinking it might give a more realistic result. But for this kind of braided hairstyle, it just didn't work at all. Cloth seams are great for loose, flowing hair, like long, straight strands, but not so much for structured braids. The result was just weird, like really weird. It lost all structure and didn't follow the motion in any natural way. So I went back to soft body physics and refined that approach instead. From there, it was a long process of trial and error. I kept tweaking the settings, stiffness, damping, mass, etc., then baking the simulation, checking the results, and tweaking again, over and over and over. Honestly, placing the hair might have taken time, but this was the real time sink. Soft body physics can be really finicky, and every small change means another baking, another preview. It requires a ton of patience. Eventually, though, I got something I was happy with. The hair had just the right amount of bounce, enough to feel alive, without looking floaty or unrealistic. I used the same technique for the braids, and again, after some tweaking, it worked great. But just like before, it involved a lot of testing and small adjustments. In the end, it was totally worth it versus something super satisfying about seeing the braids move naturally with the character's motion. It gives so much life and personality to the model. Alright, so now I had the body, the hair, and the hair physics done. It was finally time to get this lady dressed. I started off with a lot of optimism, maybe a little too much. Thinking, okay, let's just use Blender's sewing simulation. Yeah, that was a mistake. At the beginning, I genuinely believed it could work. I approached it just like it would in a real 3D clothing software, laying out flat fabric pieces like sewing patterns, positioning them properly, and stitching them together. It was exactly like you do in something like Marvelous Designer. Except I wasn't in Marvelous Designer, I was in Blender. And while I had high hopes, deep down, I kind of knew Blender's cloth sewing tools weren't really up to the task. At least not without some serious workarounds or third-party add-ons. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any free add-ons that did what I needed. But still, I powered through because, Blender can do everything, right? So I pushed forward, trying to stitch the different parts together, simulating the bust piece like a real garment. And yeah, it wasn't working at all. I tried for a while because I didn't want to give up right away. I wanted to stay persistent, keep the vision. But the more I tried, the more I realized I was just wasting my time. And in the end, the how didn't matter as much. What mattered was the result. So I ditched the sewing idea for the torso and just molded the chest piece directly by extruding it from character's body. No simulations, no close physics, just pure modeling. Way faster, way more reliable, and it still looked good. I did keep the sleeves though. I thought, okay, maybe I can at least have some nice fabric simulation on the sleeves. I still really like the idea of soft, flowy sleeves. So I gave it another try. And unfortunately, that didn't work either. So once again, I scrapped the simulation and moved on. At that point, I decided to try making the skirt. The first version of the skirt was horrible. Just awful. It looked bad. The clothes physics were completely broken and the shape didn't respond well at all. I tested different approaches for way too long, trying to save something that clearly wasn't going to work. Eventually, I just deleted the whole thing and started over. This time, I modeled a clean, smoothed-out skirt, something stylized and nice looking from the start. I didn't record last modeling session, but it was pretty straightforward. Then, instead of using clothes simulation, I opted for soft body physics. Since the movement I wanted was light and stylized, there was no need to aim for high realism. Soft body was simpler and did exactly what I needed. And to my surprise, after a few adjustments, the result looked pretty nice. It had just the right amount of bounce and movement. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to bring the character to life. So yeah, the skirt was finally done, and I was actually happy with it. Then I went back to the sleeves one last time. At this point, I had completely given up on any sort of clothes physics. Instead, I just molded them directly by extruding geometry from the arms, adding a bit of thickness and scaling them up slightly to get that loose open sleeve look. That's it. No physics, no simulation, and honestly, it worked perfectly fine. You can't simulate everything, and not everything needs to move. With that, the main clothing was finished, but hey, she's a witch, so obviously she needed a witch hat. I made a classic wide-brimmed cone shape, but I wanted to add a bit of life to it, so I added a soft body modifier directly to the hat, with a zone of influence focused around the middle. That way, the tips of the hat could move and bounce a little as the character walked and turned. The wizard turned out really fun. It's a simple trick, but it added a lot of personality. The soft motion of the hat really gives her that playful, magical vibe. Alright, so now let's move on to the face. Because obviously this lovely little lady needed a natural face. Originally, I had made the pasteboard version of the face, just something basic to work with. But in the end, I decided to remake it from scratch. Although, to be honest, it ended up being pretty close to the original anyway. So let's talk about the facial expressions. Animate emotions. I used a pretty simple but super effective method, shape keys. I broke the facial movement down into three main zones: eyebrows, eyes, and mouth. That way, I could build different expressions by combining them like a puzzle piece. It's really flexible, super lightweight, and honestly, it's way easier than doing a full wig for facial animation. Especially for a stylized character like this one, I love how expressive it can be with just a few key shapes. Then I moved on to refining the skin. Up to that point, I had just used a basic color with a bit of subsurface scattering, just enough to get a soft, translucent, skin-like effect. But I wanted to push it a little further, so I painted some blush directly on the face. Cute pink cheeks and a slightly rosy nose. To do that, I used a mask texture. I hand-painted the areas I wanted to be rosy and white on the mask. Then I plugged it into a color ramp to blend between the base skin color and the blush tone. The logic is simple. The whiter the mask, the more pink it gets, and the darker the mask, the more it stays the normal skin tone. And with that, I got a nice soft transition between skin and blush, exactly like I imagined. Then I went back to the clothing for a bit and added some extra details near the neckline, just to help define that area a bit more. I will probably come back later and add even more accessory or decoration, but for now the base outfit shape is done. So moving on, you may have noticed something was missing. Yep, she had no shoes. So it was finally time to give this character some proper footwear. My first instinct was to just take the feet, delete the toes, and try to morph that into boots. Spoiler alert, bad idea. It looked weird and messy, so I scrapped that plan. I instead modeled a new pair of boots on top of the feet, and that worked way better. Once I had the shape right, I needed to bind them to the rig, and at first, I just parented them directly to the bones, but of course, that gave me really stiff and awkward movement, and things weren't deforming properly. Things weren't deforming at all. Eventually, I did it the right way. I parented the boots to the armature with automatic weights, which gave me, well, much better results. I still had to adjust a few things manually, repaint some weight, check if the feet were poking out, tweak the shape and thickness of the boots, but nothing too complicated. And once I was happy with the shape, I added a subtle leather-like material, just something that felt stylized but rounded and matched the vibe of the rest of the outfit, and that's pretty much it for this stage. We now have a character with a full face, working facial expression, a blush system, clothes, a witch hat, and now stylish boots. Here she is, the final look of our little witch. She's dancing now, full of life, and yep, she is the red-haired version. And that's the one you all voted for on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. So thank you so much for being part of the decision. That's made it way more fun. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you. I hope you enjoyed watching her come to life as much as I enjoyed creating her. If you want to follow the rest of this journey, including building her little witchy house next, feel free to follow me. And if you'd like to support what I do, you can find me on Ko-fi or Patreon. It truly helps me keep creating magical things like this. Also, big thanks to Demon Gamies for the wonderful background music. Go check them out. So see you in the next one.